In the previous video, we saw how to use the clone stamp tool and also how to use it together with the healing brushes. But now I'm going to show you a couple of advanced techniques with the clone stamp tool. First and foremost, let's go to the window menu and open up the clone source panel, where you can access additional options for this tool. And one of the first things you will find in this panel is that you have actually 5 different sampling options. I mean, if I go to another document like this one here, and I use the clone stamp tool and sample from a point in this document, let's say on this window here on the right side. So let me just select that, alt click to sample on the corner. You can see this sampling is from this document. But if I go to the other document and select my second sampling, which is at the moment empty, I can sample once again from here, and now I can switch between these two. So when I keep the first option selected, I can paste details from the other document into this one. Or I can switch to the second option, and as you can see, that's going to use the current sample option from this document. So you can have at the same time 5 different sample points saved, even from different documents. Now, why would you ever need that? Well, for example, we can use this first sampling option from the other document. I will create a new layer. Just remember, we never retouch on the background layer in order to keep it non-destructive. And then I can start painting with this. But if I were just paint this in here, I can see it will be too big. So what I normally do, if I bring in sample details from other documents, first I start scaling it. So the W and H values are here for scaling your sample details. So before you start painting with it, you can reduce the scale and you will see a full preview of the sampled document while you are doing it. So I'm just dragging the W value to the left to reduce the size. And let's say something around this size I think will work quite nicely. But then I can also rotate this sample detail to match the perspective in this image. I'm going to rotate it to something like that. And now if I reduce my brush size, I can start painting it. And I'm going to go around the edges first, just so I can see where the detail's going to end. There you go. Because I have the aligned option on, I can let go the brush and then go back later, so it doesn't have to be done all in one brush stroke, thanks to the aligned option. But as you can see, we managed to sample from another document and clone into this current document. But of course, because I've done this on a separate layer, I can always use the eraser tool and erase back a bit from the edges. But I'm not too concerned about being too accurate, because you can see even that current window there, or that window frame, has some white paint around it, so it actually looks quite authentic. When I turn it off, that was before, this is after. So apart from scaling and rotating and sampling from different documents, you can also reflect your cloning, which is another amazing feature. And let me show you a bit silly but simple example which really will make you remember this. So if I use the clone stamp tool here and sample from the tip of this pyramid, or we could even use this one here, the main one. I'm just going to create a new layer, of course, for this, and I'm going to reset the size of the clone stamp. So I click on the reset icon, so that goes back to default option, and you can see already my sampling there, but I can increase the brush size. I can move to the side a bit as well, just so you can see it better. So we could paint this as normal wherever we want it, even in another document, as we already learned. But what I'm going to do here is to flip the cloning vertically. So I'm going to flip the horizontal value, and as you can see, now it's going to be upside down. So let me just make my brush slightly smaller. I'm going to align it here and start painting. Like that. Now I can make my brush bigger. Again, thanks to the aligned option, we can go all the way to the top and then keep going and going until we get the details in. So there's our upside down pyramid. And the only problem is that we have that halo around the edges. But once again, because we used a separate layer, we can always use the eraser tool, click, and then shift click, remove those closer to the pyramid. Again, click, shift click, and maybe once more, click, shift click until it's completely removed. And then further away, we can just paint over it again with the eraser tool. Because it's all non-destructive, I'm not that worried about the details. And we can also delete here whatever we lost from the original tip of the pyramid. So you can see by using the flip option for the sample detail, we managed to use the clone stamp and turns details upside down at the same time while cloning. If I keep my clone stamp like that, even for the next sampling point, it will still remember to use upside down details. So we could set up the other pyramid as well upside down, and so on and so forth. So I'm sure you can imagine that this technique can be used for so many useful things as well, not just silly effects like what I'm doing right now. But let me show you another brilliant technique, which will be using the clone stamp tool within a filter called the vanishing point. And this is how you can use cloning in perspective. So what if we want to remove this ugly building from this nice scenery? So we have a couple of buildings here with nice colors, and then we have this ugly storage in the middle. So what if I want to remove that building and use some of these other buildings to fill up that space? So for that, we are going to use the vanishing point filter. Now, unfortunately, this one can't be used as a smart filter. So normally when I use this, I create a new layer. So Command J or Control J will duplicate the current layer. And then we can call this retouch or retouched. And then we can go to the filter menu and choose vanishing point. Once this opens up, it will show us the current layer that we selected. And there we have the buildings as well. Now, first here, what I normally do is to zoom out, because we have to define the plane which will define the perspective in the image. The easiest way to do that is by clicking on a point in the image, which needs to connect to another point, like this one here. Then go down again at the third point and the fourth point. So this plane here clearly defines a 3D plane, but if the plane turns yellow, that means it's not perfect. So you need to slightly adjust it until Photoshop can really understand what you want to do with this. And normally just dragging points around slightly will help you, but I like to drag it out. You saw me dragging it out, so increase it a bit bigger, and I cover up more buildings with it, and that will also help me to define these 4 points. It's important to set this up right, because it will be difficult to create this later. Now sometimes you might find it difficult, and you can get even sometimes the red outline, which means it won't be able to create the perspective like that. So you just have to refine this 4 points. Once you get it right, once it looks good and all the vertical and horizontal lines seem to align to the buildings, that's when you can extend your plane. So you can drag the top edge further up, you can drag the side points further out as well, making sure you can cover the whole area which you need to replace, like this area in our case. And I'm still checking here in the background. If I feel like it's still not perfectly aligned, I can always make adjustments, like that point there to that point. I think that's even closer to what we need now that I saw it in the distance. And I will probably need a little bit more towards this part here. Plus, don't forget that we will also need to retouch the reflections. So I'm going to drag the center point down, because we have to work with the reflections too. And don't worry if your plane is bigger than the actual area that you are going to paint over. It's always good to have it bigger and cover up as much detail as possible than to miss out on details. So I can even drag this further up. And now I can zoom back closer. And this is where we will switch to the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to select the clone stamp. And luckily, at this point, we won't see the mesh. which allows us to find the best spot for replacement. And because we have a yellow building there, I think what I'm going to start with is this red one here. So just to have a nice pattern, we will have a yellow building, then the red, then this blue, green, and then the next red one I think is going to be neighbors with the green one. But let's just see. So mainly this 3 building I'm interested in, but depending on the perspective, we actually might need to copy these 2 as well in. But because they are next to each other, it shouldn't be that difficult. So I will hold down the Alt key and I'm going to click on this point here. Remember, always reference from an edge when you use the clone stamp tool. And then once it's aligned, we can start painting already. Now, you have also healing option here in vanishing point, but I have that turned off. But I keep the aligned on, just like normally I like to have that on. So I don't have to do everything with one brush stroke. I can keep painting like that. So if I keep going, you can see we probably will be lucky and just be able to get rid of the whole building by using the sampling that we picked up earlier. So there's all the buildings that we selected coming in one by one. And most of this building is now removed, and then only a small detail will be left there, which we can remove later. But don't forget about the reflection either. So let me just go down, and there's the reflection. So to make sure that we match it to the buildings that we copied, I'm going to now sample from somewhere around here, or actually even better from the left side there, align it where the reflection is supposed to be, and then paint over it. So just like on the top, we can then replace this ugly building's reflection and have the nice buildings showing up at the bottom. Now, of course, it would take a bit of extra work until this gets perfect, but if I click OK, we can already see before and after the difference. And the whole point of doing this in vanishing point is that it helps us to do the retouching in perspective. Once we have everything almost perfectly set up in 3D space, we can then correct details. So this was just a few additions to what you can do with the clone stamp tool. So remember the clone source panel and the vanishing point filter. In our next video, we will look at another essential retouching filter called Liquify.